I'm Collette Nolan, and I have a studio in the Cork Artists Collective. I'm a lecturer in the Crawford College of Art and Design, where I teach first to third year. My practice is video art installation, and themes that I'm interested in the work are mostly around home, female experience, embodied knowledge, and those kind of overlooked areas of place and space, and our experiences of place and space. The Glucksman and Age and Opportunity invited myself and Gerry Murphy, the poet, to collaborate on a film poem with the group from Ballyphehane. And we met the group 4 or 5 times, I think, over a month or two. The things around the idea of hospitality and home, memory, place, childhood memories. So this was really interesting. Gerry had some very interesting poems about his childhood memory, and I presented my practice on a project I did with my son, which was like an 8-year-long diary of his play. So I showed that to the group, and they found that quite interesting in the sense that it brought back a lot of their own childhood memories. Some of the first things we did was ask them about their childhood memories. They wrote them down, drew them. So we had lots of lovely discussions. And I must say the group themselves really kind of guided everything, because they had a lot to say about this. Obviously, it was their memories of old Cork, their knowledge of the city, the idea of hospitality and how it's changed. So the big thing was the idea that hospitality, even though they still felt that the Irish welcome is still very strong and all those things, but that how society has changed in a way that one couldn't just be calling in all the time, and the way things have changed that way. And they're always said that the community was very strong. You could always drop in, so the key was always in the door, and that meant that you could always call, you could always have a cup of tea, a chat, and even if you were a child, you sat in on those conversations and you kind of overheard what the adults were talking about, and you may be shooed out after a while, but they were talking about that kind of sense of community and finding out, and knowledge that was passed through those conversations. So it was so entertaining for myself and Gerry. It was wonderful. They were a very lively bunch, so they actually broke into song quite a lot.
God save all here, he kindly said, a red-haired girl stuck out her head. God save you, sir, she kindly said, come in and close the half door.
But the kind of threads of memory and childhood memory and hospitality remained throughout. And Gerry was very open to leaving his poetry be chosen. He didn't want to choose the poems. So he read poems to the group, and we kind of chose the poems that were to do with those themes. So he had a lovely poem, My Father Drying My Hair, and it was about that kind of very intimate moment where your father, and they were saying that fathers weren't so involved in those days with the kind of domestic chores with the children. So his father took hold of Gerry's hair and was drying it, and Gerry describes in the poem that sensation of his father's hands holding his head, and he went into some kind of a rapture about that.
Drying it somewhat distractedly by the fire. Dry it properly, my father commands, behind his newspaper. I make a half-hearted attempt, but soon lapse into ineffectual dabbing at my dripping ends. Eventually, as is his wont, he takes the towel and vigorously rubs it dry. My head held sweetly in the busy orbit of his hands, lulled into a drowsy rapture.
So that was a lovely kind of memory, and we were interested in those kind of overlooked little moments in the home, and the domestic space, where those things really emerge and are very strong. So that was kind of what I was thinking then for the film, was to kind of hold on to some of those really kind of quiet and special moments that you find in your, when you're growing up. We filmed every week during the sessions. I gathered they brought in objects and photographs that they had an interest or a kind of connection with. So we looked at those. I kind of filmed them along the table, and they wrote stories and all sorts of things. There was people who had an interest in folklore of and history of the city, like the tenements in Middle Parish, the Brehon law, the early Irish law. There were so many things. So in the end, I kind of brought together all those layers and elements as best I could to kind of reflect all the things that were present in the workshops. There was one day then it was a beautiful day, so we went outside and we filmed the group outdoors, and they broke into song again and they started dancing, and it was just a beautiful moment out in the grass. It was very joyous, so I decided to keep that. I also have in the film a bubble, which I kind of used as a metaphor, so that while Gerry's poems were being read, and they were read by my father, so that as the poems were being read, the bubble is kind of very gently floating through the landscape, and you kind of just let the poetry, come into yourself. And they felt that there were people who were more fearful, so there was a lot of fear in the community now around locking your doors and worrying about that sort of thing. So that's a big change in their lives, in the sense of the community. They talked about how if they could go for miles and hours and hours and hours off into the countryside, playing or walking in groups, and that there was never any concern about how long they were out or where they were, because they were always with the people in the park, and there was always a mix of ages, and people would always look out for each other, and the parents knew that they were all fine. So that's a big change for them. And I think they had a level of anxiety actually for young people. They were very kind of concerned about the impact of social media and phones and screens and all the things that we have to deal with now. They had that anxiety for the young people, because they have grandchildren and nieces and nephews and different things. They worried for them, and worried about their experience of the city and life and community, and how that is so different now. The film has a kind of it's kind of a slow, kind of meditative kind of feel to it, and the bubble roams across the landscape very freely and changes, and it's like an orb going through it. So that kind of, the feeling of the bubble going through the landscape is that freedom. It was like a freedom of just traveling. Now, of course, bubbles now have a very different significance with the pandemic. We're all in our bubbles and pods and things like that. And that's also kind of interesting, because the bubble or the pod that you're in are the people that are most important to you. So you need, so there's always that need to be with a community or people that are important to you.